I wear a medical ID bracelet. It's not ugly. It's not clunky. And fortunately, I don't have any medical issues. But there is a medical emergency message engraved on my bracelet. If you're the spouse of someone with dementia, you need a new piece of jewelry. You might also need sleigh bells. You're listening to My Spouse Has Dementia, a podcast that uses personal stories, occasional interviews, and simple rituals to support caregiving spouses. I'm Zita Christian, writer, life cycle celebrant, caregiver. My husband has Alzheimer's, late stage. Dementia creates unique hardships for a caregiving spouse: financial decisions, end-of-life arrangements, family pressure, anger, grief, changes in physical intimacy, and those are just some of the challenges you'll face. I hope that by sharing my journey with you, you'll find something helpful, a new perspective, a moment of humor, and a way to survive. This is episode number 4. My husband was diagnosed with dementia in 2014. In the first few years after that, I was certainly concerned, but I wasn't alarmed. That changed in 2017. That was the year we stopped going out to eat. Being in a restaurant, even our favorite neighborhood restaurant, made my husband anxious. He couldn't read anymore, so when the server came to take our order, I'd say something about having left his glasses at home, and then I'd order for both of us. The restaurant didn't have a family bathroom either, so that also became a challenge. That year, 2017, was also the year that Dick had to give up the car. He hadn't been driving for over a year, but his car was still parked in front of our house, and that's a story for another time. That was also the year Dick had the worst of the nightmares. One in particular was so violent, so threatening, I slept in the guest room for 3 nights, with the door locked. I contacted his neurologist who adjusted one of his medications, and it worked. Dick still has nightmares now and then, but nothing like the ones he had in 2017. I officiated a lot of weddings that year. I married couples in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. Dick would often come with me to the rehearsal. I'd just find a quiet place where he could sit and watch, and as long as he could see me, he was fine. Now, rehearsals are casual and filled with laughter. Families are smiling, couples are kissing, and Dick enjoyed the atmosphere. And I enjoyed having him with me on drives that were sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours. Eventually, though, he just couldn't simply sit and watch. He couldn't remember where he was or why he was there, and so he'd get up and he'd take a walk. Worrying about my husband meant that I wasn't being fully attentive to the rehearsal, so I knew I had to make a change. I told Dick that from then on, I needed some quiet time before the rehearsal to gather my thoughts, and that it would be best if I went alone. In the years that followed, that was just one of many little lies that I would tell my husband. On the day of a wedding, my neighbor would come over and stay with Dick, and if she wasn't available, I'd ask my daughter Laurie. As willing as both women were, I knew I had to make other arrangements. My neighbor is a busy woman, and my daughter, also a busy woman, lives 90 minutes away. And now I needed someone to stay with Dick for both the rehearsal and the wedding. Over several years, I tried working with several caregivers through both private arrangements and through agencies. For a variety of reasons, though, they didn't work long-term. So I decided I would book only half the number of couples I usually serve. But when arranging for help still proved too troublesome, I made the decision to put my work as an officiant on hold. Now you have to understand, couples book me anywhere from 8 to 18 months in advance. So even though I decided not to book any new weddings, I still had several on the calendar for that year and the next. Again, I asked my daughter for help. Depending on the time of the ceremony, she might have to come to my house the night before or spend the night on the day of the wedding, and she always said yes. I went back to my neighbor and asked her to cover the rehearsals. She said yes, and I promised them both that there would be no additional dates. I'm telling you this story because if you're a caregiver of a spouse with dementia and you don't have family or friends who can help you, your world is going to shrink. Every patient is different, and so there's no way for me to predict what part of your world will shrink or how much will shrink or how fast it will happen, but your world will shrink. You might find you don't have the time that you once had, or maybe you won't travel as far as you used to, and not only for day trips, but also just for simple errands, and you can forget about vacations. Disrupting your spouse's daily routine, even for what you think would be a great vacation, can be a real source of anxiety for your spouse. The neurology nurse I work with explained that a healthy person can experience a disruption in routine and recover pretty quickly. But that's not the way it is for a person with dementia. Recovery is much slower. And if the disruption is serious, the person might not recover at all. So I do what I can to maintain a routine. For instance, if Dick is sitting in his recliner and I'm in the dining room, he can see me. If I'm in the kitchen, he can hear me. But if I'm upstairs in my office, he can't see or hear me. So he calls out, "Help me, help me, help me." I come downstairs. There's nothing to warrant the alarm. He's not in any kind of physical pain or danger. He's not hungry. He doesn't have to use the bathroom. It's not time for his meds. He's alone in the room. And I think being alone makes him feel unsafe. I think it scares him. So now, in addition to the desktop computer in my office, which is where I prefer to work, I keep my laptop in the living room. And I've turned the dining room into my sewing room. I used to keep my sewing machine and fabric in the basement, but turns out I like sewing in the dining room. I get to work in natural light, and Dick can see me. Right now, I don't have the big room in the basement that I used to have, and my dining room table is covered with yards and yards of linen and lace. I'm just learning to live with the mess. An early symbol of my shrinking world came in the form of jewelry. At Christmas of 2018, maybe it was 2017, my daughter Laurie gave me a medical alert bracelet. As I said at the beginning of this episode, the bracelet isn't ugly or clunky. The centerpiece has a rose gold finish, and the band is a series of heart-shaped links. The rose gold ones are solid, and then there are silvery ones that are open. I remember at the time thinking that this was a really pretty bracelet, and I still think that. I didn't have a medical condition that warranted wearing a bracelet, but the bracelet really wasn't for me. On the back of the centerpiece are 3 lines of text. And keep in mind there's not a lot of space, so you have to abbreviate. The first line is my name. The last line says ICE, and that's for in case of emergency, followed by my daughter's cell phone number. The line in the middle says husband, W/ for with, ALZHMR. So anyone looking at that bracelet has my name, my daughter's phone number, and know that that's for an emergency, and the fact that my husband has Alzheimer's. Just think about it. Imagine that I'm on the road somewhere. Dick is at home alone. I have an accident and I'm unconscious. The police, they would get my driver's license and call my home. Dick would answer. The police might say something like, "Your wife has been in an accident. The ambulance is taking her to XYZ hospital." And let's say that that hospital just happens to be an hour away. Under ordinary circumstances, the police are going to assume that Dick understands the message, and the police would then hang up and assume that Dick would soon be on his way to the hospital. But if they checked for a medical alert bracelet, which I know they do, they would know right away that my husband has Alzheimer's, that he probably would not understand the message, that he might become agitated, that he certainly shouldn't be encouraged to drive a car. And all of that is assuming that he could still answer a phone. I realize there are a lot of flaws in that little scenario, the biggest being that I would have left him at home alone. Still, the basic need for that bracelet is clear. If your loved one has reached the stage that he or she can't comprehend and act on emergency information, particularly if the information is about you, you need a medical alert bracelet. Laurie found mine at Lauren's Hope Med ID Jewelry. The website is LAURENSHOPE.com. Sometimes you are the one who needs to be alerted. If your spouse is given to wandering, you need to either find a way to lock the door from the inside, like having a deadbolt that opens with the key from the inside. Of course, if there's a fire and you're inside and you can't find the key to unlock that deadbolt, well, you see the problem. Or instead of a deadbolt on the inside, just make sure you know whenever that door is opened. I do say if your spouse wanders, because not everyone with Alzheimer's or other dementia wanders. My husband hasn't seriously wandered off to parts unknown yet, but he has gone for a walk around our condo complex and gotten confused. I talked about that in episode 3. It's important to remember that an incident is not a pattern. But if your spouse does wander off, even just one time, that could be one time too many. An easy and inexpensive solution is to hang a generous cluster of sleigh bells on the doorknob or on a hook at the top of the door. That's the front door and the back door. You need something that will make a loud enough noise whenever the door is opened. If you've listened to the first 3 episodes of this podcast, you know that my husband is, well, he was, a hiker. He likes to walk. He likes to be outside. I'm a planner. A year or 2 after Dick was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we went down to our local police department. I said I wanted to meet with a community officer. I explained that Dick has Alzheimer's, that he likes to walk, and that should he get lost, I wanted the police to have whatever information they needed in advance in order for them to issue a silver alert. The officer asked some questions to Dick, took his picture, and thanked us for being proactive. Alzheimer's is a disease that progresses at a different pace for different people. You might not think it was necessary for Dick and me to go to the police department and plan for something that might never happen. But at whatever pace the disease progresses for your spouse, you're the caregiver, and it's easy to get overwhelmed. If your spouse does wander off and you do need to call the police for help, you might not have a photo handy. My point is, do what you can in advance. While we were at the police department, the community officer told me that should Dick fall and I needed help getting him up, assuming that he was not injured, I should call the dispatch desk, not 911, and just say that I needed lift assistance. They would send somebody right away to the house, no sirens, no flashing lights. And obviously, if Dick fell and he were injured, I would immediately call 911. In addition to my cell phone, I still have a landline, and I've taped that police dispatch number on every handset in the house. Look, if your spouse just got a dementia diagnosis, chances are you don't need to rush out and buy a medical alert bracelet or hang sleigh bells on your door or visit your police department. But just don't wait too long. And as the disease progresses and your world shrinks, don't give in. Push back. Stretch yourself. 4 years ago, when I decided I would no longer officiate weddings, I launched my other podcast. It's called Ritual Recipes. I offer rituals for the big milestones of life like the weddings and funerals, as well as for smaller life events such as moving into a new home or sending your child off to college. I create rituals to celebrate the seasons too. That's the physical seasons and the seasons of a woman's life. And I work with clients to create personal healing rituals. Right now, I'm working on a ritual for dementia caregivers, and I'm looking for a few volunteers who will help me test the ritual. There's no money involved. What you'll need is a fresh avocado pit. That's right, just the pit. An ultra-fine black Sharpie, and a notebook. And when the time comes, I'll ask you to tell me about your experience. If you're willing to help me shape this new ritual, let me know. You can send an email to zita@myspouseHasDementia.com. In the meantime, if you know someone who is caring for a spouse or any family member with dementia, tell them about this podcast. We caregivers need to stick together. We need to remember what my friend, retired hospice chaplain Victoria Burdick told me. Between now and dead, you've got a purpose. Don't be timid. Take care of yourself. And I'm serious, because we need to survive. Thanks for listening.